A Place to Belong. By Melinda Curtis. Chapter 1. From the moment the auto repair shop door swung closed behind him, Axel Martinez knew he'd made a mistake coming back to Seaglass Bay Automotive. Not one to back down from the hard stuff, he planted his steel-toed work boots on the concrete floor of the closed shop and looked around. Standing toolboxes and electronic diagnostic equipment lined the side and back walls. An old Ford sedan occupied a far bay, hood up. Car lifts sat empty in two of the three other bays. To his right, a small waiting room and office had been made with plate glass running waist-high to the ceiling. Seaglass Bay Automotive was a mechanic's dream. Well cared for and large enough to make a good living. Axel wanted to buy it. He'd scheduled a meeting here with the owner, Dennis Hammond, and his real estate agent, Sam Bell. But he'd been stood up. Axel stuffed his hands in his grease-stained coverall pockets. I was supposed to meet Mr. Bell and Mr. Hammond? He hadn't meant that to come out as a question. There was no question about whether he had an appointment. The question was why hadn't the men honored it? Axel glanced toward the exits. First, the small door behind him and then the rear exit behind Penny Bell Carlson, his high school crush and Mr. Bell's daughter. Dad had something come up. He sent me instead. Penny's cheeks flamed red. If history was any indicator, her blush was deeper when she lied than when she was embarrassed, which meant history. Axel hated the past. He tried to find something positive here, in the present. All he found was Penny. She looked better than what he remembered from a decade ago. She still had her all-American, girl-next-door looks, blonde, blue-eyed, trim body, classy clothes. He hadn't taken in more than a glimpse of her in what seemed like forever. Penny stayed in her circle of friends and family in Seaglass Bay, and he stayed in his. Axel kept his oil-stained hands in his coverall pockets, glancing over his shoulder at the exit once more. Girls like Penny weren't supposed to give guys from the wrong side of the tracks a second look. Except she had. That one time. The fallout hadn't been pretty. Axel worked his jaw at the memory. Forget the past. A sound from the auto shop's office door drew Axel's attention. A little blond boy of about 3 pressed his body against the glass door, flattening his palms near his face, smushing his nose and open mouth against the glass in what seemed like a silent plea for help. A large blue sippy cup hung neglected from his hand, then dropped to roll around at his feet. "Oh, no," Penny said in a panicked voice. She ran between the service bays to the office, her black high heels tapping on the concrete with the same urgency Axel's blood was tapping at his temples. Trey woke up. "I'm coming, sweetie." Trey? Axel glanced around the shop, imprinting the image of the place he'd once worked into his memory, storing it along with the other things he'd been unable to have in his lifetime because of what his mother was, and the chip he'd carried on his shoulder as a result of it. What kind of name is Trey? We're judging names now? Penny opened the door for the boy and swung him into her arms. That's rich coming from you, Alexander. She smoothed the boy's haystack hair away from his face with all the love Axel had longed for as a child. His name is Brett John Carlson III. Trey. Named him after Brett, did you? Her ex-husband. Axel generally kept to himself, but even he'd heard about Penny's messy divorce brought upon by Brett's two-timing. Just the thought of the high school golden boy and bully gave rise to angry bitterness. Let's hope this little guy makes a better go of things than his father. Shut up, shut up, shut up, he thought. Penny frowned at him. Sorry. Axel removed his hands from his pockets, curled his fingers, crossed his arms, and tucked his fists into his armpits, trying to lock himself and his emotions up tight. Penny was the last person in the world he wanted to pick a fight with. She'd been nice to him in school, not that he'd always deserved it. And she'd been nice to him today by showing up and telling him in person that Seaglass Bay Automotive was out of his reach, like that Ferrari he dreamed of owning someday. She hadn't said as much, but Axel could read the writing on the wall. Penny was still frowning at him, Trey's head tucked under her chin. The toddler stared at Axel, too, but without the frown. Axel tried to charm the little guy with a smile, all without loosening the arms over his chest. I'm generally a background player, kid. I don't speak until I'm spoken to. That's new, Penny murmured. Axel supposed he was different than when they'd been in school. Back then, he'd popped off on the regular. Arms still tightly crossed, Axel bent at the knees to look Trey in his big blue eyes. Sometimes the pendulum swings, kiddo. Smart-mouthed teens can learn to think before getting into trouble. Smart-mouthed teens aren't always looking for trouble, but they always seem to find it. Penny's frown seemed to be giving way at the corners. I've stayed out of trouble since graduation. Alex straightened, giving the kid another smile. Hard lessons learned. I'm a good guy now. No trouble at all. He straightened, glanced around the shop, and sighed. Not that everyone seems to believe it. This has nothing to do with who you are, Axel, Penny said gently. But her cheeks were pinkening again. I won't kid myself. I'm not stupid. I know that. Penny's voice was still soft. She was being nice to him again. He had a weak spot for people who were nice to him. I just thought, Axel's arms loosened. His fists unfurled. His hands dropped to his sides. I thought that the past was in the past. I thought people had forgotten that I'm the son of the town drug addict. Or that I was the motorhead delinquent who liked taking fast cars for joy rides. He made a silent apology to Dennis Hammond and Sam Bell, both of whom had great taste in cars. No wonder they didn't want to take his interest in buying the place seriously. Penny's little boy stared at Axel with big, blue, puppy dog eyes. Axel, Penny's gaze softened to something resembling pity. Geez, oh Pete. I have to get out of here. But the lock was off his emotions, and they tumbled out, falling between them with a thud. I'm not the guy who lets anger run his mouth anymore. I'm not the guy who lets frustration guide his fists anymore. I'm not even the guy who kisses the first girl to be nice to him. But what Seaglass Bay sees, he sighed. What this town sees is apparently something different than who I am today. That's why you're here, isn't it? Hang on. Penny scoffed, cheeks a soft pink. I wasn't the first girl to be nice to you. Or the first girl you kissed, if memory serves. But you were the only one who meant something to me. Axel glanced at the exit once more. I didn't come here to skip down memory lane. I've been saving, and I was hoping, he shook his head. You want to start your own auto repair shop, she finished for him, closing the distance between them with slow steps, hips swaying because of those almost hypnotic heels. Those heels should be outlawed for use by single mothers. My own shop. Yes. Axel forced his gaze to the ceiling, hating that he felt vulnerable bearing his fragile dream to her. That's why I'm here, right? But if your dad and Dennis didn't show up, I don't know that any offer I make would be accepted anyway, Anne. Don't you dare talk down to yourself. His foster mother's voice rang between his ears as if Lita Hollister had hold of his shoulders and was trying to shake some sense into that thick head of his. She'd been dead and buried for 2 years and yet he could swear she was the angel who rode shotgun on his shoulder. Axel, Penny began in that gentle way of hers. If you were a serious player for this business, you'd have to qualify for $1 million loan. That's how much the property and business itself are listed for. Her gaze roamed Axel's face as if there was a riddle to be solved somewhere between his lips and his eyebrows. Did you get pre-qualified? Go to a bank? Axel gave a quick shake of his head. Have you ever bought real estate before? Axel shook his head again, focusing on the cute boy in Penny's arms so that she wouldn't see how unfit he was for this thing called adulting. I'm a newbie when it comes to things like bank loans. And relationships with girls from the right side of town. Never had one. I've paid for all my vehicles in cash. He tickled the little nugget's feet. Don't you think that's smart, buddy? Stricken by shyness, the little dude tucked his feet up, folded in on himself, and hit his face against Penny's chest.
Yeah,
I'm shy around strangers too, Axel admitted, simultaneously coming to terms with the fact that his dream would remain just that, a dream. It was time to go. He gave the shop one last, longing look, taking in Penny's shapely legs out of the corner of his eye because he was a man, after all, and she was his kind of woman. Which meant, like everything else, she was out of reach. Are you serious about this? Penny asked suddenly, so close now that if she turned her shoulder it would bump into his. I am, but guys like me. Guys like you should get pre-approved for financing, Penny said firmly. Her unwavering tone matched the determined look in her eye, although why she was determined was beyond Axel. I can refer you to Cindy at Bayside Mortgage Company. She doesn't intimidate first-time property buyers. He didn't admit he had no idea what a mortgage company was. Don't I need to talk to a bank? No. Cindy works with lots of different banks. She finds financing so you don't have to waste time sitting in a string of banks and filling out paperwork to apply for loans. Penny explained it all so simply and without talking down to him. That's helpful. Axel glanced around, hopes rising. So I might be able to buy this place after all? Own his own shop. Set his own rules. Be his own boss. No, Penny said gently. I say that not only because you'd need to put 20% of the purchase price down in cash. $200,000? Axel closed his fingers, crossed his arms, and tucked his fists into his armpits again. He'd saved a lot, just not enough apparently. But there's also the fact that you stole Dennis Hammond's Corvette back in the day. Despite balancing a rug rat on her hip and shouldering a tote that was big enough to hold a small television, Penny placed a hand on Axel's wrist and gently loosened his grip on himself. Dennis is old school. He's never going to sell his life's work to you. And if he did, he'd charge such a premium that it wouldn't make financial sense. Hey, I was in middle school when the incident in question happened. A hot wiring prodigy of his mother's car-thieving drug dealer. Technically I didn't steal his Corvette because I brought it back. In fact, that was where his foster father Clay Hollister, who'd been the town sheriff at the time, had caught him. It's called joyriding, which is a rite of passage. Innocent fun. And besides, Dennis doesn't hold a grudge. He hired me to work here after graduation. He knows what I'm capable of. Those last words felt negative. Don't you dare talk down to yourself, Alexander. I mean it. Axel lightly tickled Trey's ribs. The kid gave him a tentative smile. We both know Sheriff Hollister twisted Mr. Hammond's arm to hire you. Penny fiddled with Trey's hair again. Your parents are saints. Foster parents, Axel murmured. He didn't call Lita and Carl Hollister mom and dad. He'd never been given that right. And, yeah, Lita was a saint. His chest felt tight just thinking about her being gone. Hot on the heels of that feeling came the mixed emotions he had with Clay selling the house where he'd almost felt like part of the Hollister family. Axel rubbed at the sudden tightness in his chest. He was the only foster kid Clay and Lita hadn't adopted, and that still had the power to sting. Some dreams aren't meant to be. Just because this opportunity is out of reach, doesn't mean they all are. Penny looked equal parts sympathetic and optimistic. It was the optimistic part that Axel found hard to believe. I appreciate the offer, Penny, but it's obvious I'm never going to succeed here. And by here, he meant in Seaglass Bay. He mustered a smile for Trey. Nice meeting you, kid. He tickled the boy's foot lightly again. See you later. Bye, Trey said, as he squirmed and giggled. Be good. Then he continued to repeat, bye, as if he enjoyed hearing the sound of his own voice. Axel headed for the exit, striding out with his shoulders back and unapologetic steps that would have made Lita proud. Trey. Penny lifted the suddenly silent 3-year-old in front of her. Say that again, she commanded because her son had stopped talking the moment the door shut behind Axel. Bye, be good. Trey nestled his head beneath her chin, mute. Penny's heart scaled up her throat. Every child is different. How many times had Dr. Inman told her that? Not that Brett had listened once. He was more likely to say there was something wrong with Trey, words dripping with disappointment. Penny's jaw thrust out. Trey was 3. The average 3-year-old had a vocabulary of about 200 words and spoke in 3 to 4-word sentences. But not Trey. He rarely spoke one word, let alone 4 in a string. At least, not until today. Not until he'd met Axel. Her son had spoken. And he'd spoken to the one man from Penny's past that she had regrets about. Axel still had the power to draw her near. He was just so inexplicably appealing. That lean frame that looked like it could withstand the strongest storm, and probably had. Those dark as midnight eyes that had seen, and still saw, too much. Black hair with a rebellious glint of red in it. Everything about Axel Martinez was magnetic to her. In elementary school he'd been scrawny, squirrely, and smart-mouthed, which often made him a target of the bigger boys, as did the way he missed a lot of school, which prevented him from forming strong friendships. Those absences were because of his mother. Or at least, that's what Penny's mother told her the day she'd asked about Axel when he'd missed the class Valentine's Day party in the 5th grade. During that conversation, Penny's father had told her to stay away from kids like Axel. Kids with addicts for parents, he meant, as if it was a foregone conclusion that they'd become addicted, too. Then the Hollisters took Axel in and made him go to middle school on the regular. That was back when Sheriff Hollister had talked Axel's mother into entering rehab in Humboldt. No one had seen her in Seaglass Bay since. Not that folks had forgotten. Axel used to thumb his nose at anyone who held the specter of his mother against him. In school, he'd been determined to do things his way, speaking out when he wasn't supposed to, standing up to bullies without being asked to. Penny had admired his courage because she didn't have the same chutzpah. She'd followed the rules even if they didn't make sense, which meant she'd also gone along with the crowd, even if deep down she hadn't wanted to. And then there'd been that kiss during the high school graduation dance. That one fabulous kiss before Brett had pulled them apart and punched Axel in the face, knocking him to the ground and demanding he keep his grubby hands off Brett's girl. At the time, she hadn't been Brett's girlfriend, although things had been moving in that direction. Penny drew Trey closer, seeking comfort. Everything had changed that night. And not for the better, not in the long run, unless she counted Trey. But what if this was her do-over? Penny could help Axel find a location to open his own auto repair shop, one he could afford. That's what good realtors did. They found properties to fulfill people's dreams, whether it was for a home or a business. They didn't sit in the office and process paperwork for other realtors. Penny didn't move other than to draw in a deep breath. Axel didn't want her help. Just like Brett no longer wanted her. When something's defective, you send it back, Brett had told her. Penny held on tighter to her beautiful baby boy. He wasn't defective. Trey reached a hand toward the door and made a grabbing motion. Want him. Those few precious words. Tears filled Penny's eyes. You want Axel? Want Ax, Trey wailed. Gathering her courage, Penny scurried toward the door, flinging it open. For her son, she would do anything. Axel. Axel, wait. She ran into the parking lot. Wait. I'm still here. Axel was sitting on the tailgate of his white truck, peeling his coveralls from his legs. His work boots lay on the asphalt, along with balled-up black socks. Beneath his work clothes, he'd worn a blue t-shirt and black basketball shorts. He reached for a pair of black flip-flops. Do you need help locking up? The office door is tricky. You have to lift the handle before turning the mechanism. No, Penny glanced down at Trey, who was grinning at Axel. Can you tickle Trey again? Axel shot her a cautious look. Why? Because, Penny hesitated, protective of her secrets. But honestly, what did she have to lose? Trey talked to you. He rarely says more than one word at a time. Speech delay? Axel hopped down from the tailgate and gathered his work clothes and boots into a bundle that he tucked in the corner of the truck bed behind the cab. How do you know about speech delays? Penny's ex-husband hadn't known. My mother was unreliable. Alex framed his mother's situation so matter-of-factly, as if it was no big deal to be raised by a drug addict. I spent a lot of time in and out of foster homes with a variety of kids. Special needs. Speech delays. English as a second language. Kids with emotional setbacks. You name it. I've seen it. Axel grabbed a metal water bottle and took a long drink, during which time Penny's mind continued to be blown. He was so nonchalant about the whole thing. Have you taught him to sign? Yes. Penny drew a calming breath and stared into Trey's bright blue eyes, so full of intelligence and warmth, her heart aching with love and swelled with hope. Hope? She tried to believe Dr. Inman, but she hadn't had much in the way of hope materialize. Until today. Until Axel. Penny drew a calming breath. Please. Talk to him again. Penny settled Trey more securely on her hip. You want to talk to Axel, don't you, sweetie? Trey hid his head under her chin and held out his hand, 3 middle fingers curled toward his palm. He shook it from side to side. Yes, Penny translated, staring up at Axel with tear-filled eyes. Yes, he wants to talk to you. That's because I'm easy to talk to. Axel chucked Trey beneath his chin. Not that anybody outside of my foster family knows it, not even your mom, little man. Trey giggled but said nothing. Don't you want to say, bye, to Axel? Penny jiggled Trey a little, feeling a bit desperate for a repeat performance from her son. Geez, oh Pete, you're tense, Penny. Of course, he's not going to perform on command. Axel's phone buzzed in the truck. Hey, look. I've got family dinner in a few. Why don't you go inside and lock up? Me and Trey need to have a meeting of the minds. Axel held out his faintly grease-stained hands and Trey fell right into his arms. Penny's jaw dropped again. Not because Axel's hands weren't pristine, they were a working man's hands, but because her son didn't go easily to strangers. Penny? Pen? Axel reached over and nudged her chin upward with a gentle touch, closing her open mouth. I've got places to be and I'm sure your little man needs dinner. Right. She nodded. I'll go lock up. Don't forget the sippy cup. And to lift the office door handle. Axel turned away, pointing out things to her son. His tire. His truck. The seagull flying overhead. Bird fly, Trey said with certainty, earning Axel's praise. Penny's breath caught. Everything had changed for Penny the night Axel had kissed her. And not for the better. Maybe this was a sign. Maybe she could get her life back on track. She and Trey and. She didn't dare include Axel in that thought. But the idea hovered there like a single, sherbet-tinged cloud on the horizon of a brand new day.